Hello, everyone, and welcome to Suffolk Archives. And we are acting as a hub for Outing the Past, the International Festival of LGBTQ History. My name is Mandy Rawlings. I am the Community and Learning Officer, and today I'm being supported by Kelly McGibney, our Commercial Officer, and Sam Steele, a history student from the University of Suffolk, who is working with us on placement at the moment. And before we start, I would just like to make you aware that we will be recording some of the speakers, and this recording will be available after the event. Please, can you keep your cameras off and your microphones muted? So we are honoured to be acting as a hub for the Outing the Past International Festival of LGBTQ History. Just to tell you a little bit about us at Suffolk Archives, we are the custodians of Suffolk's archival history. We have 9 miles of shelving. We have an estimated 94 million pieces of paper, and our oldest document goes back 900 years. We have 3 branches of Ipswich, Bury, St Edmunds and Lowestoft. And with the funding support of the National Heritage Lottery Fund and the University of Suffolk and Suffolk County Council, we have recently opened our flagship facility, archive and heritage centre called The Hold in Ipswich. And with the funding, we've also had the opportunity to engage more people than ever with their archival heritage. And one such project is called Pride in Suffolk's Past. You will see a video shortly about the project, which really is about engaging people with the hidden histories of LGBT community in Suffolk, but we've also tried to collect people's experiences of living in the county today. It has been an enormous, and I have to say, quite unprecedented effort by the volunteers and all the community groups who've supported this project. And we've collected and uncovered a vast amount of stories and experiences that will be showcased at our Pride in Suffolk's Past exhibition, which will be available here at the Hold as soon as COVID restrictions allow. So just as a little taster, I thought I would show you a film.
Pride in Suffolk's Past is a Sharing Suffolk Stories project funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, the University of Suffolk, Suffolk County Council and the Coastal Communities Fund. The project explores the hidden histories of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and gender non-conforming people in Suffolk's past. Due to legal and social repression, all too often these stories have gone untold. Through original documents found in Suffolk Archives collections and other local museums, these experiences can be shared for future generations to understand how things have changed and what work is still to be done. Alongside contributions shared by the LGBTQ+ community in Suffolk today and discussion pieces, Pride in Suffolk's Past presents the experiences of Suffolk residents throughout a period of significant change in attitudes towards sexuality and gender identity.
Discussing sexual orientation and gender identity requires sensitivity. Most of the historical figures featured lived during a time when identifying as LGBTQ+ was considered unacceptable or illegal. This means that we do not know how they identified. Orientation, but we have avoided making any decisive statements. Ideas of what the archive collections should include have changed over time. Previously, materials collected in the archive often would have focused on people who were wealthy or white or powerful. This perception has changed, and Suffolk Archives now strives to include and uplift the stories of those who were previously marginalised. The LGBTQ+ stories from the Suffolk Archives collections lack diversity, and we acknowledge this is due to the marginalisation of Black, Caribbean, African, South Asian, Eastern Asian and Southeast Asian people's histories. Suffolk Archives are working to ensure our contemporary collecting is reflective of the diversity of Suffolk's LGBTQ+ population to ensure that everyone's experiences are recorded for future generations.
Everyone at Suffolk Archives is delighted to share these and many more LGBTQ+ stories, past and present, through a brand new free exhibition at the Hold in 2021. An original Pride in Suffolk's Past book has also been produced to ensure that these stories can continue to be shared with future generations.
So in conjunction with that exhibition, we will also be hosting a number of activities at the Hold and our other branches, including family and craft activities, escape room experiences, and also, as you can see, we'll have the publication for sale. Full details we will share with you at the end of this webinar. So, as I said, we are acting as a hub for the Outing the Past International Festival for LGBT History. And obviously, it's LGBT History Month. So, to tell you a little bit more about this organisation, we also have a film from Sue Sanders, who is the co-founder of LGBT History Month, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about it.
Welcome to Outing the Past 2021, our very 6th festival. It is just so exciting. This year we are virtual for obvious reasons. And I'm Sue Sanders, and with Dr. Jeff Evans, we coordinate the project together with our wonderful team who, like Jeff and I, volunteer our contributions and who I will introduce to you shortly. This festival presentation is one of nearly 20 such events, being hosted by our festival partners that range from large national museums to smaller voluntary organisations, and we are so grateful for them to be involved. Further information about this festival hub and all the other festival events can be found at our Outing the Past website, which you can see there. The aim of the festival is to showcase the remarkable and fascinating accounts of past attitudes to sex and gender diversity, a history that has been too often marginalized and denied. In doing so, we seek to enhance the collective reading of our past and thereby provide a more inclusive and more reliable history for all. The festival is made possible by all those people who kindly answered the invitation we send out each summer to offer presentations of LGBT+ history and/or unique testimony. We had 70 offers this year, which was just wonderful. These offers are firstly moderated by our academic board that make up the annual OTP Festival Gazette, from which each Festival Hub partner choose their respective programs. Our wonderful Outing the Past team that makes all this possible are, here's Dr. Jeff Evans, and he was the person who came up with the idea. This is Caroline, who looks after the Gazette. That's all the 70 presenters are put on a Gazette and then sent to the hubs. This is Lila, who does all our Zoom work and has taught us and the hubs how to use Zoom. This is Jenny, who looks after the website that you have used to discover us. This is Maisie, who looks after promotion and all the niggling details to make everything happen. This is Stephen, our OTP theatre coordinator, who is also currently working on a fantastic project in West Yorkshire, celebrating the first ever National Gay Pride March in Huddersfield, and that's for next year. And this is Ken, who oversees our academic programs that include online seminars and, when health conditions permit, our annual face-to-face OTP conference gathering. We really hope that you enjoy this Festival Hub presentation, and please do send us, our Festival Hub partners, your feedback. There'll be a little thing at the end which you can fill in. It's a survey monkey, it's brilliant. Well, I hope you enjoy the programme and it encourages you to investigate more. It's going to be truly exciting, I think. So great to see you all. Thank you for being there. Sit back in the comfort of your home and enjoy.
So we have a fantastic selection of speakers with you this evening. There's a little bit of a change of schedule. So to start with, we're going to have Trudy Howdon, LGBT plus poet laureate, who'll be talking an LGBT life, how it was and how it is. And then we'll have a quick Q&A afterwards for 10 minutes. And then we'll move with Sue, who you've just met, who is the co-founder of LGBTQ plus History Month. And she'll be talking about the history of LGBTQ History Month. We will then have a short break for 10 minutes and we will be introducing Dr. Clifford Williams and his wonderful account, Courage to Be, Organised Gay Youth in England between 1970 and 1990. And then we'll have Veronica McKenzie with Uncovering the Histories of Black and Asian LGBTQ plus history communities through the Haringey Vanguard Project. So, further ado, we should get started.
Hello. Hello, everybody. It's so lovely to be invited here. Happy Outing the Past Festival. Hello to everyone in Suffolk. I'm going to read some poetry that I've been writing over a long period of years, actually since the 70s, actually since the 60s. And I'm sure that you will be able to relate to some of the things that I've experienced. I come from a very working class northern, very small mill town in Lancashire, and the first time I'm going to read is one about my coming out experience. Now, as we know, we all come out many times in our life, but this is about my first one, coming out kiss. It was that kiss that did it. Blew away my misconceptions about lads, about fancying them, that is, about wanting to be their girlfriend. Tracy was trouble with a capital T, tall, tempestuous, a truant and a tease. She cut a swathe through all the boys, discarded them like broken toys. I was 12, she was 16. And a walking, talking, living dream. I was bored with secondary school. I preferred dancing and playing the fool. On that day, she noticed me, said she'd teach me how to be a femme fatale like she was. The first lesson was kissing, and I never looked back. So that was the start of it. But living in Great Harwood, there was certainly no gay people there. I never met a single gay person in all the time I lived there. And believe me, I was looking very hard. But fortunately, I was rescued. I got a grant to study dance, music and drama in London. And I was pretty sure that I would definitely find some gay people there. This is what I wrote about my experience moving to a big city and meeting up with other people like myself. And I'm sure lots of you had this experience. It's called The Way We Were. Newly arrived in London, seeking fame, fortune, friendship, and the kind of sex we couldn't find in our small towns and villages. We were ravenous, wanted to grab life by the throat or fall in and be overwhelmed by it, grow into ourselves. We were gagging for it, brimming with fear and excitement, impatient for a brand new life of our own making. We took courses, loitered in clubs, pubs and places, hoping to meet a bona fide homosexual or become one. We marched together in streets paved with hope and wonder, held hands greenham, shouted, made love as much as possible. The way we were, we thought would never change or end. Now, the way we are today will tomorrow's history amend. Oh, thank you. I'm feeling the love. So I went to London and wow, it was just fabulous. So exciting meeting new people. I joined the women's liberation movement. I started working in organizations like Gay Sweatshop, went to lots of parties, hit the clubs, and yes, I joined an organization called Rock Against Racism and also campaigned for homosexual equality. I started doing agitprop performances in the street and having little bands and going out and having terrific fun. It was an absolute blast. We were living life to the full. This is a poem I wrote about that period, that Halcyon period, called Queeropolis. We are the heart of this fair city, forming its breadth and length. We sprinkle it with fairy dust, empower it with our strength. Welcome to Funopolis. Every type of us lives here. This city's great if you're a queer. The range of man, of woman and man living without fear. Welcome to Diversopolis. From the bottom to the top, kinky, winky, romantic or not, as big as our imagination. Our lives are truly hot. Welcome to Sexopolis. So tonight it's party time, a chance to flirt and dance, cast our old, begin the new, salutations to love and romance. Welcome to Queeropolis. Yes, we were having an absolute blast. We were partying all the time and doing lots of marching in the streets. Of course, it was Greenham. And suddenly we started noticing in the 80s that lots of our friends seemed to be vanishing. Lots of our male friends were vanishing. And of course, it was the onset of AIDS, and what a that was, and how much we suffered for groups to support our brothers. But it was a very frightening time. This is a poem I wrote about that time. AIDS. The name strikes dread into our hearts. We know what its impact can be. We've seen the worst and best of it, its devastation of our community. In the hedonistic excess of the 80s, we saw our playmates falter and fall. Their fluids turned to Hades River, some swept away, some not at all. The randomness of the infection, the suspicion, ignorance and fear, our family, friends and lovers blamed just because they were queer. Investment in medical research stopped this killer in its tracks. The afflicted now can live a life improved by treatment and facts. We honor our brothers and sisters who didn't survive the fight. We salute and support the survivors whose lives turned out all right. Let us celebrate our lives today and those whose lives are past. Embrace our loving community. May it prosper, flourish, and last. As I'm sure Sue will tell you, what happened actually during the whole period in the 90s was that we managed to stop Clause 28, which would have had a terrible impact on the education of all the up and coming next generations, our LGBTQ+ community. And this is a poem that I wrote that I started teaching in schools. It's targeted at 11 to 13-year-olds. It's called Shout Out. Stereotypes are boring. Stereotypes feel tight. What's the point of squashing into something that doesn't feel right? It's okay to be different. It's okay to be queer. We're all the same just under our skin. We deserve to live without fear. Bullies are pathetic. Bullies are uncool. If they think hate can make it right, they really are the fool. Just relax and be yourself. Don't worry what people say. Be the person you want to be. Non-binary, straight, trans, bi, or gay. During this period, I was writing poetry and touring, and I was commissioned to write a poem for the London Olympics, which really escalated my poetry profile. And I realized that I wanted to actually focus on the community that I love. And I started working and trying to develop the then existent LGBT poetry circles within London and also extending parts of the UK. And in 2016, I was appointed LGBT Poet Laureate, which was a tremendous honor and also responsibility. And of course, it gives me the opportunity to access places that I wouldn't be able to do as a common or garden poet, and use poetry as a catalyst for social and political change. So in 2016, I recorded the first ever LGBT poem which was broadcast on network TV, and it's called Idaho. I am your brother and sister. I'm both Mrs. and Mr. I'm lesbian, gay, trans, bi, queer. I am myself. I'm your auntie and uncle, father and mother. I am different and the same. I am your family and your lover. I'm black, white, pink, every hue, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Jew, skinhead, goth, punk, new romantic. I am me, I am you. I'm your nurse, your teacher, the boy and girl next door, someone in your street. I am your neighbor. I'm no better or worse, no richer, poorer, blessed or cursed. Just part of the same gravitational wave as you are. So being LGBT Poet Laureate has enabled me to support some of the campaigns and political organisations that I really admire. I work for Stonewall, Amnesty, ELOP, Mind, the NHS, the Met Police, lots of different people. And I've been working for a number of years, about 7 years actually, for an organisation called Stop Hate UK, and they have an event every year called National Hate Crime Awareness Week, and I've been writing the poem for the launch of that. So I'll read you the one that I wrote in 2018. It's called Hatred Hurts Us All. Let us stand together, united in this call. There is no place for hatred, because hatred hurts us all. Whatever your ability or gender, religion, age, colour of skin, this battle against hatred is one we have to win. Let's educate the ignorant, dispel prejudice and fear, promote that love is a human right. Be open and be clear. We can make a difference by what we do and say about the intolerance and injustice some people suffer every day. It's okay to be different. Let's honour who we are. Make our world a safer place for all of us, near and far. Thank you. I do lots of gay pride festivals up and down the UK and Europe and the States. And so I'm going to read you one of the poems that I wrote for London Pride, actually. It's called, and actually I'm going to read you this poem because I could feel so much love. It's weird Zoom, isn't it? Because actually we're all so zoomed out, we're sick of Zoom, but actually I could really feel the love, and I hope that you can feel it coming from me. And this poem that I've just picked up here is called Love Happens Here. And this was the last London Pride I wrote it for. Love happens here, in family LGBT, in our relationships far and near. It's the heart of us and we. Love can be enough in sunshine or in showers. When the going gets tough, it's love that inspires. Love is diversity. It's the best that we can be. It's the talent and creativity within our community. Love is you and me. We show it in our smiles, in our endeavor and tenacity, in our fabulosa style. Thank you.
That was absolutely fantastic, Trudy. Thank you so much. I'm just going to give you a little clap there. It was just wonderful. I just have to say, there's a couple of things there. You made me feel young again. Oh, I remember those days. And I also particularly loved your comment about today, tomorrow's history will amend. I love that. That's the historian coming at me. Thank you so much. I'm just going to hand over to Sam, who's going to take some questions. So if anybody has a question for Trudy, please, will you add it into our Q&A?
And please look me up and check out my website, and please be my tweethearts. I'm LGBT poet laureate without the E because there were too many letters. But yeah, check me out and let's pal up. Team together.
Hi Trudy, thank you for that. That was really great and really interesting. One of the questions that have come through, I'm sure you've heard of Channel 4's It's a Sin programme and perhaps watched it yourself. I was just, one of the questions is, what has It's a Sin brought up for you, and do you think it was a good representation?
Well, I think he's an absolute terrific writer, and I'm a big fan of all his work. And I think it really brought it out to the public's attention. What I thought was a bit of a shame was that lesbians weren't featured at all. And of course, during that period, we did, they were our brothers. We were supporting, and also that lesbians also got AIDS. It's not just gay people. And I thought it was a shame that the work and the support that we did wasn't highlighted. I think sometimes lesbians can become invisible in history. And I think that was an example, unfortunately, of that happening. But I loved the series and I loved his writing. And yes, I do very clearly remember that time.
Great, thank you for that answer. I completely agree with you on that as well. Another question that's come through, we've got, have you ever used archives as a stimulus for a poem?
Ooh, often I get a lot of commissions, and so yes, I do use archives. I might have the idea, but obviously, if you're writing a poem for a specific thing, you have to really check your facts. And my memory for names and dates is just so poor. But what happens when I start looking at archives? It's sort of like a little rabbit hole. I think, oh, that's interesting, and I can just lose myself in archives. I do love them.
Absolutely, completely agree with you on that. Just sort of generally putting out to all of the participants, are there any more questions for Trudy? And they can be typed in the Q&A section, so we welcome any questions that you have.
Yeah, could I just say that I believe that every single one of us has got a poem in our heart. And just get it out. Don't be critical. If you're feeling something's troubling you, try and write it down. And you know what? And then just go back to it and just add to it or take away, do whatever you like with it, because that you're creating a work of art, and also perhaps helping yourself out, even if you don't show it anyone. Believe me, it's your best friend. And also a historical document, as you saw from my poems.
That's great. I think that's it for questions. I think we've got one popping through. Here we go. What would you like to say to the LGBTQ plus young people struggling with the pandemic?
You know what, a drag. That's what I'd like to say. It's just awful. But you know what? You survive it, as long as you're not dead, then you know what, you've got your whole life ahead of you, and don't let anyone put you off. Just go for it. Now you know how fragile life really is. So, you know, just be brave, have a go. If you've got a dream, just go for it. I was recorded not long ago by the British Library for posterity, and I just couldn't believe, I was so awed. And when I'd finished the poems, they asked me if I wanted to comment, and I asked them, my God, this is going to go down forever. And I just said, I'm the girl from Great Harwood, failed her 11 plus. And really, people didn't think I'd amount to anything. But you know what? Don't listen to anyone say, just go for it. So that's what I'd say. That's
really great advice, and especially to the young people at the moment. I think that's something that everyone wants to hear. Another question, they're all sort of rolling in now. Who is your favourite LGBTQIA plus poet / writer, if you have one?
Oh, I've got so many, because I've been very fortunate. I've been running poetry events for many years, LGBT poetry events. So I just know, okay, I'll just give you a few that I like. Really like Dean Atter, and also Joelle Taylor, Kat Brogan, Rosie, actually, if you look behind, you'll see all lists of names. And of course, Jackie Kay is brilliant. And our poet laureate, whose name I've just forgotten, Anne Duffy. That's so bad. Many, you know what, just go to the bookshop or the library and actually or Google LGBT poets. I mean, there's Audre Lorde, there's some fantastic American writers. So, you know, pick and mix, really, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And how do you think poetry can help the queer community to express themselves?
I think it's really important that we find a way of expressing ourselves. And poetry, it is an art form. And it's a very personal documentation of what we think. But what is surprising, you will find, is that you are not the only person that thinks that, or not the only person who's had that experience. So by sharing your poetry, you can really encourage other people. And, you know, that's what we need to do. We need to encourage each other. That's the way forward.
That's great. And you mentioned that there was sort of lack of an LGBTQ plus community back in Great Harwood. Do you know if there's more of one there now?
Oh, now Manchester Pride. I mean, I was born in 1954, so, you know, I'm like prehistoric practically. So there was nothing, absolutely nothing going on then. I never met you know, people would have been frightened that anyone would think they were gay. I mean, I hid it, and I was having sort of secret affairs and bits of stuff going on, but you'd never let anyone know. But now, of course, you know, it's fantastic. It's much more open, but that doesn't mean that it's not still difficult for young people or older people to come out. It's not easy. It's like every time you move jobs, every time you move to a different area, all about coming out. I mean, to be the way we are does take courage. And I think we should be really proud of ourselves, actually, that we are people who have that.
Definitely, them words really resonate there. Finally, last question. If anyone was to want to contact you with any more questions, how would they go about doing that?
Oh, if you just email me, or, you know, as I say, be my tweetheart. I'm at LGBT Poet Laureate at gmail.com. Mandy, perhaps you could put on the chat all my contact details. Yeah, contact me if you're doing anything or want me to come and do something for your group or whatever, just let me know, because even if I'm not available, I know lots of people, lots of poets. And anyway, it's
Brilliant.
good fun.
And just to end the Q&A on sort of a really nice note, if you had to choose a line from one of your favourite poems, what would it be?
Let there be love.
Oh, what a lovely way to conclude.
Really is. Thank you so much, Trudy. What we will do is we'll also share your details, our post-event circular as well, and we'll also put them in the chat too. Thank you so much for joining us, Trudy. I hope you've enjoyed sharing your time with us in Suffolk or, and around the rest of the country as well. So yeah, have a lovely evening. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so next we have Sue Saunders joining us, co-founder of LGBTQ History Month, who you did hear from earlier. So I'm going to hand over to Sue now.
Well, it was a great pleasure following Trudy because her and my journey are not unsimilar. And it was funny that she mentioned that she failed her 11 plus. You can see that I'm Professor Emeritus Sue Sanders of the Harvey Milk Institute. And it's kind of weird that that's the case. I'm assuming you can see my first slide. Mandy?
Yes, I can see your slide.
Great, good. I just, something came up with saying that could I share my video? So yeah, so oh, I see what you mean. Right, okay.
That's better. Thank you, Sue.
Fine. So I work with Stuart Milk, who is Harvey Milk's nephew, and if you haven't come across whom Harvey Milk yet is, then you've got a treat in store. And Stuart does masses of work around the world trying to enable LGBT people to be free and to be celebrated. And he and I have done work together. And he asked me once why I hadn't got an MBE. And I said, because I would never take anything with the word empire in it. So he came back the following year with this professorship, which is rather wonderful because I didn't get my 11 plus. I didn't get my A levels either. I never went to university. So being a professor is a bit of a laugh and rather wonderful. So yes, I'm chair of Schools Out and the co-founder of LGBT History Month and the Classroom. And I'll tell you a bit more about both of those in a minute. Schools Out is the organization that has, over the years, supported all this work. And the Schools Out goes way back to 1974, which I was not a part of at that time, but a bunch of gay teachers got themselves into a sort of a social group to support each other, because at that point it was very, very difficult to be an LGBT teacher, or in those days we would be just saying L and G. The B and the T weren't around at that point. So they set themselves up this little group to support each other. It became very political very quickly because one of their number was sacked by the Inner London Education Authority, John Warburton. And the Inner London Education Authority said, well, we'll give you your job back if you sign this letter, which says you will never come out to your students again, because he had come out to his students when they'd seen him in a very early gay pride march. So a petition went out asking us to sign that we wouldn't sign such a letter, which I was very happy so to do, and was kind of shocked that the teachers that I was working with were not that comfortable. On reflection, I was about to go off to Australia. I knew I wasn't going to be a career teacher. So I guess, I was in a much more privileged position. And Paul at that point, who I'm going to tell you a bit more about, also discovered Schools Out. So that was our first beginnings of discovering it. And Schools Out has sort of grown from there. I got very excited thinking I had found something about the 1974 gay teachers group. But in fact, on closer inspection, I discovered that this is Melbourne in 1976, which is kind of extraordinary because I was in Australia in 1976, but I was in Sydney and I never discovered them. So it's amazing what one can find when you go into archives, which somebody was saying how important archives are. And it is amazing what you can find when you Google things as well. So another gay teachers group in another continent. Now, it was very interesting hearing Trudy's poems because she, like me, comes from a time when we didn't have that word intersectionality. And a very early Schools Out website had this on it in an attempt to really get people to recognize the full diversity of the LGBT community. And we've spelt it out like that so that we would really get people to think about the diversity. And if somebody felt they weren't being recognized in that list, they could tell us and we would add it to them. Section 28, Trudy mentioned, and that was 88, and it was horrific. We did a lot of fighting against it. This is a photograph of me with my partner, still my partner now, Jean Nadeau. I think it was one of our first dates, weirdly enough, on the last Lesbians Pride March. And we're holding a Schools Out poster which says Real Families. And the reason that it says Real Families is, for those of you who remember, the section 28 said, thou shalt not promote homosexuality or promote homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. Horrific phrase, absolutely appalling. So we produced this poster showing different families, including a lesbian and gay family. These are all the books that we wondered whether would be banned, with local authorities funding libraries. Would libraries not be able to have these books? We also wonder whether local authorities would not be able to fund theatres that were showing plays written by gay people. The word promote was never been used in legislation before, so nobody knew what it meant. Now, while we were fighting it, I began to think, does it actually really affect schools? It was aimed at schools, but then I suddenly remembered that Thatcher had already passed the local management of schools, which meant that local authorities didn't have the same level of power over schools that they had before. So I went to the National Union of Teachers and said, I'm not convinced that Section 28 actually legally affects schools. They checked and discovered that that was the case. And so every school was written to and told Section 28 did not affect schools. Well, you'd never know that that went out, because the effect that it had in schools was absolutely, totally horrific. And there's a very interesting book that has just recently come out called The Big Gay Adventure, which is about teachers talking about how they've come out, and this total shadow of Section 28 on them was quite horrific. So Paul and I, having seen the end of Section 28 in 2003, thought, well, maybe it's time to have our dream of setting up LGBT History Month. Both as teachers, we obviously knew the power of Black History Month and felt that, you know, it would be good to have an LGBT History Month. I was working in Southwark at the time. Paul was in a school in Southeast London as well. And I'd been working with Southwark Council, and we'd been working with the police and working with the council, and we'd also done a conference about tackling homophobia. And they set up an LGBT officer in Southwark, and his first job was to find a place where we could launch LGBT History Month. And here we are at Tate Modern in the cinema. And you can see there are rather a lot of people on there and this tiny platform, because you don't need much of a platform for a cinema. And the reason why there are so many people there is because from the very outset, I wanted to make it very clear that we were diverse. So I had 3 trans people. I had LGBT people of many different ethnicities and religions and ages, able-bodied and disabled, and we also had a heterosexual ally. So from the outset, we were really trying to make it clear how inclusive we wanted to be. And this was something else that Paul wrote, again, to try and get people to recognize our diversity. And in a sense, very much like Trudy was saying, you know, we are everywhere and we're not that different from you in some ways. So that was very much what Paul and I were trying to get across. Here is Paul with Sir Ian McKellen. And Sir Ian and I and Michael Cashman were in the arts lobby against Section 28. And we did masses of work together. And Ian has been very supportive of LGBT History Month. He is a patron of ours. But as you can see, Paul unfortunately died in 2008, and that was a terrible shock to me, and I still miss him. He was such an amazing guy, and there's a very strong obituary on the website. You can find out all the amazing things that Paul did. Tony Fenwick then took over from Paul and became my co-chair, and we did masses of work together. He was a very strong trade unionist, but he died last summer. So it's been a great loss to me. And then Steve, who was the chair of trustees, who dates back to working with me way back to the late 90s. Paul and he and I went off to a conference in Finland against tackling homophobia. He felt that he needed to retire. So we've really had to sort of pull our socks up and get together a new group. And I want to show you the group because it's really important in a sense for you to know all the amazing people that make LGBT History Month, the classroom, Outing the Past happen. None of these people get paid. It's all voluntary work, and they do it because they passionately believe in making LGBT plus people in all their full diversity visible. Seth is an officer at the UCU and also helped us do the poster that you'll find on the website called Voices and Visibility, which we've also turned into a website so that all that historical information is interactive and it's spoken so blind people can access it as well. Maisie has been with us for some time and does a lot of promotion and writes and makes sure that Outing the Past functions behind the scenes. Andrew does amazing things. He does the Facebook. If you haven't discovered our Facebook, please look at it. He changes the banner every day and it's groaning with information and ideas at the moment. And he's terribly excited that we've only just started an Instagram account and we've just hit 4,000. So he does amazing work to get the message out there. Kate is also a member of Diversity Role Models, and as a trans woman works with us and enables us to be as supportive as we can of our trans siblings. And you'll be more than aware of the attack on trans people at the moment. So we really do have to be very strong and challenge the attacks on trans people, which is coming from the right and from the government. Nakia is a young teacher who joined us last summer. Adam has been with us for some time as a poet. I'm sure Trudy knows his work. He has a publishing company and he's been with us for some years now and helps with Outing the Past as well. Dr. Jeff Evans, you saw the film beforehand, so you know that Jeff was the person who came up with the idea of Outing the Past. 6 years ago, we weren't having enough history, so dreamt up this brilliant system that we're all sitting here watching. And I'll tell you a bit more about all the other things that Outing the Past does. Mikhail is another young teacher who's just joined us this summer. Nick has been with us since the very beginning of LGBT History Month, and he holds the record of never having missed an LGBT History Month launch. We always launch in November so that people have plenty of time to know what to do and to get something together for February, because if you leave it till after Christmas, it can be a problem. He is an amazing photographer, and if you go on the LGBT History Month website, you'll see Flickr and innumerable wonderful pictures that he's got, which is an amazing archive of all the things that we've done. Beth does the websites for Schools Out, LGBT History Month, and the Classroom. Steve is our theatre person, and Jeff had the brilliant idea of making sure that we didn't just do presentations for Outing the Past, but actually theatre as well. And Steve has written plays and also worked with other playwrights. And it's so exciting. I mean, it's so amazing to see these incredible shows and plays which bring to life hidden pieces of history. And the very first Outing the Past was he did a 3-parter, which was about a same-sex drag ball where the police came in and arrested everybody. And the Friday night we were at a club bar in Canal Street, and the actors were there dancing around and doing cabaret, and then other actors came in as police officers and arrested them. And then on the Saturday we had the political debate between the politicians and the journalists and the police about making all the arrests and how they were going to tackle it. And then the Sunday we actually had the trial taken from the trial records, and he's done many other very exciting pieces. And I think if you go to Outing the Past at the moment, there are 2 films of plays which were based about very important things that happened in Burnley. Who knew Burnley was a really important place for LGBT people? Lila is our Zoom queen and has taught us all sorts of digital stuff. So I've learned all sorts of things from her, and she's also helped the hubs be proficient. Abdin joined us this summer and is a doctor. He's an anaesthetist practicing at the moment, bless his heart, dealing with COVID, but also finding himself time to do work with us. And he has really made the NHS join us, and he's done several presentations about LGBT issues in health. Jenny is the person who does the website for Outing the Past, so you've discovered her handiwork. Ken does the academic conference, which is a more in-depth series when we have academics talking about LGBT History Month. And Caroline wears several hats. For us, she is the person who pulls the Gazette together. So this summer, 70 people offered us presentations. She put them all in a Gazette, make sure it's all easily readable, and sends them to the hubs and they choose. But she's also a member of the group who this month forced Jonathan Mercer, the Veterans Minister, to finally say that soldiers who had been dishonorably discharged could finally get their medals back, and she's working to make that won't be the last thing that they will be forced to do. And it's been Caroline's work, along with her co-workers in her charity, that has made that happen. So they're an amazing bunch of people who really care passionately about the work and make everything happen. We have trustees. We're a charity. Lynn has now taken over from Steve and is the chair, and she's had masses of work to do because we were a bit lax in getting our policies together. So she's worked very hard to make us all up to date. Max was a National Union of Teacher president, so is very keen to make sure that we keep our education concepts clear. Professor Ian Rivers is a lecturer up at Strathclyde and has written several books on homophobia. And Sophie's just joined us this summer and is a mortgage broker and is our treasurer, so is looking after the money. Much needed, of course. Okay, so we started in 2005, and we have gradually shifted and changed and developed. And it wasn't until 2011 and 12 that we came up with the idea of having a theme. And what gave us that idea was, at that point, we recognized that UK had just been given the Olympics, so that's why we did 2 years on sport. And we had a launch at the Oval, Cricket Oval there, and at Twickenham for there. And the paucity of information there, all the information that we gleaned, you can go onto the website and find, but it was pretty poor back then. But this year, the BBC has been doing something about LGBT people in sport every day, either on the web or on the radio or on TV. I mean, it's just incredible. It's really exciting. I was talking to Lou Englefield today about it, and it was her that we did all the work with. And she was saying to me today, it is just extraordinary, Sue, how it just takes off. STEM, science and technology and maths. We were at Bletchley Park, and we sort of concentrated on Alan Turing, and it was very exciting that we actually had a relative of Alan Turing there. Music was a doddle. I mean, so many LGBT people are music. History, we did actually have our first sort of big event way back in 2009, where we had the launch at the British Museum, which was very exciting and instigated a lot of work that the British Museum have now built on. And Richard Parkinson's book about the LGBT artifacts in the British Museum, Dan Vaux's work in the Victoria and Albert and many other museums. And it is a total joy to see how LGBT History Month has jump-started all the work that museums and royal palaces and other people are doing. And we've had some amazing presentations in the Outing the Past, sort of showing what they're up to now. And it's just unbelievable. I mean, if anybody had told me, 20 years ago that the National Trust would be celebrating LGBT people, I would have just laughed and said, no way. Religion and belief, we had some people challenging us as to why we were doing that, but I felt it was really important that we celebrated LGBT people who had faith and also challenged the religions that were giving us a hard time. And we certainly did both. Poetry and plays was a doddle, so many LGBT poets. And this year we're doing mind, body and spirit. And of course, it was kind of amazing that we chose that. We had no idea that we'd be dealing with COVID. Our badges, those of you who know me know that you don't leave the room until you've bought one. And I'm hoping that I'm reminding you that you can go onto the LGBT History Month website and get yourself your own badge. The first 4 years, all we did was to change the color of our logo. Then we went to universities and asked the graphic design department to put it on the curriculum, and I would go down and tell them what the theme was, tell them the words that we wanted, and tell them to design something that would work on a small size of a badge and also on the back of a bus. This is our current year, and this was Goldsmiths who did that. But next year, very excitingly, we have opened up a competition so that primary school kids, secondary schools kids, and youth groups will be given the job of designing it, and we will have a big competition and choose the winner. Our theme, body, mind and spirit, PSHE, personal, sex and health education. Lily Parr is our lesbian, an amazing professional footballer with an incredible kick, and the BBC have actually done a package on her, so if you want to know more, there's plenty there. Mark Ashton, if you've seen the film Pride, you'll know how amazing he was in making common cause with the striking miners, and in so doing, waking up the trade unions so that they are now much more receptive and work very much harder for LGBT rights. Maya Angelou, an incredible writer, Black campaigner in the States, total absolute champion of making sure that of challenging homophobia, racism, misogynism, and disableism, an incredible writer. Michael Dillon, very early trans person, in his youth was a rower as a woman, and then gradually found medical people who would help him transition. And it was very, very early, and it was very difficult for him. But then he got 2 degrees, and then he became a Buddhist. So you can't be more body, mind, and spirit than that, I think. And then our plus person, Mark Weston, is intersex. And he also was an athlete, and as a woman represented Britain as an Olympic javelin thrower and discus thrower, and again gradually found medical support for him to be able to identify in the gender that he wished to be, and married. Out in the Past, you're all there, so you all know about it, which is just wonderful. And the theatre, I'm hoping, will come back next year. 18 hubs, so there's many more coming up. We've had some, but there are more to come. So, you know, go on the website and find them and join up. And I'm hoping that that's how you feel. The whole point of LGBT History Month is to facilitate other people to do their thing and to do what they want to do to celebrate. So I'm going to stop there and wait for anything that anybody wants to ask or say.
That is wonderful, Sue. Thank you so much. It's yeah, there we go. I have to say, it's so wonderful to hear about all the work you and your stellar team do to bring us LGBTQ History Month. It's fantastic, and we're more than happy to help promote the children's badge competition for next year.
Well, I think it's. I think we've already set up the situation. I'll talk to you about it, Mandy, afterwards, because
Lovely.
I think the situation is that people are now doing it because they've got to start doing it by March. But I'll discuss it with you afterwards.
Brilliant.
But there's not stopping anybody getting their badges. All they have to do is go on the shop, and it's me who puts them into envelopes and the lanyards. I post them all, and I try and get down to the post office the same day. My poor postman, the guy at the post office, has got to know me rather well this month.
We'll make sure that we pass your details on to everybody so that they can get on and get their badges.
That would be fantastic, Mandy. Great.
Okay. I'm going to hand over to Sam and see if we've got some questions.
Oh, somebody did. So somebody was on that wonderful thing with Eltham Palace. Yes, I watched that. There was a presentation at Out in the Past, and it was just, I mean, my heart just went pitter pat. It was just, it looked so wonderful.
Okay, we're just sort of, hi Sue, thank you for that presentation. That was great. We're just waiting for some questions to start rolling in, and hopefully some people will start typing them now. If you do want to type any questions, it's just in your Q&A box at the bottom of your screen.
I have a question, actually, Sue. Can you just really sort of express how LGBTQ History Month has grown over the time that you have been involved with it?
It's got enormous. I mean, I've written several articles recently, and I was remembering I was sitting in a group of museum people when it was just coming up to museums thinking about how they would celebrate the 50th anniversary of the partial decriminalization. And one of the women said, well, LGBT History Month is a thing. And I thought, well, yes, it has become a thing. I mean, no local authority worth its salt will let February go round without doing something. And Absolutely. When you think, you know, back in 2005, when we put the call out and announced it, I mean, I thought we'd get 10 people because we were late in getting the message out. We got 100. And now if you go on the website and you go on the calendar, there's oodles there. And then people, it's interesting because I think people actually know about it, but don't necessarily know that there's a organization that helps to make it happen. So there's lots of things I look on Google, and people are doing all sorts of things which they haven't put on the calendar. So it's sort of happening wonderfully organically. But I think the biggie for me is that we still haven't cracked the diversity issue, and we have a long ways to go to enable our trans siblings to be safe. I mean, it is quite vicious, the attacks on trans people at the moment.
Yeah, the journey hasn't ended at all. Sam, have you got some questions?
Yes, we've got some coming in now. So one of them, could you tell us about one LGBT plus historical moment or figure that you wish everyone to know about?
Well, there's a brilliant book by Diana Sahami called No Modernism Without Lesbians. And there's a review that I've written on the LGBT History Month website, and it's the most amazing piece. And she's done more books about all this coterie of lesbians in Paris in the 1920s and beyond. And it's an extraordinary group of lesbians and bis and trans women. A lot of them very privileged, it has to be admitted, because they had a lot of money to get over there. Some of them did the most incredible artistic work. Some of them were very political. And the point that Diana was making is that we wouldn't have Picasso, we wouldn't have James Joyce, we wouldn't have so many of the writers if it hadn't been the support of the lesbians. And it would have been at a time that I would have just loved to have been at, but it's very white and very privileged. The other time I'd love to be was in the States in the 30s around blues, and Bessie Smith and so many other of those Black women who were sort of starting off the blues were bisexual and lesbians. And I think I would have loved to have been around that and been there with that exciting music and the work they were doing. And of course, we've just got a film at the moment coming out looking at that whole time and being very explicit about the lesbian relationship.
Thank you
so
for that
those
answer.
would be my two times, I think.
Yeah, that film, is it Ma Rainey's Black Bottom?
That's right. Thank you. I was.
Up for
I
an
knew it was.
Oscar.
I wasn't
film.
getting the Ma Rainey. Trudy and I have similar problems. Names can just disappear when you don't need them.
That's great. And the next question we've got is, what's been the biggest challenges you faced in building LGBT plus History Month?
Goddess, that's interesting. I mean, I think the schools are still the big issue. I mean, there are some schools that do brilliantly and really get involved and really do wonderful things for LGBT History Month, and there are other schools that still don't do a damn thing. So I think that getting that into every school is still a challenge. Universities now much more. Further education colleges, I think some are good and some poor. So I think the whole education area, we have a ways to go to really get it there in everyone. And as I say, I mean, the book that I was talking about, The Big Gay Adventure, it's really worth having a look at. And these essays from LGBT teachers explaining what it was like for them coming out. Some of them had really difficult journeys. I mean, I was out as a teacher in the 60s. And it was a very different time then. I mean, we were invisible, but the homophobia wasn't so rife. It was a different kind of homophobia because they just didn't accept that we existed on some levels. And then with 28 and everything else, the homophobia became much more explicit. And there are lesbian and gay teachers who even to this day don't feel comfortable to being out to their students. And I think that is an absolute indictment of those schools, that they haven't done the work to make it safe for LGBT teachers and disabled teachers to be clear about who they are. Because if you can't bring your whole self to your work, and particularly in teaching, where you're using, you are such an important part of the process of teaching. If you can't bring your whole self to the classroom, then there's a serious problem.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. And what do you hope the future goal is for the LGBT plus community?
Well, I think the future goal is going to constantly change. I mean, I think Angela Davis said, liberty is never sorted. I mean, we go in cycles. And the assumption that it's you constantly get things improve is totally wrong. It's a cycle. You get it goes well for a while and then backlash comes, and we're in a period of backlash at the moment, and the government is not helping. I mean, there's some very right-wing stuff coming from the government at the moment. It feels like a bit like Section 28 right now, I have to say. So I think that's that process of our community really learning how to come together, really learning how to support each part of our community and deal effectively with the prejudice that is being thrown at various groups. And I think the other big issue is looking at disability more effectively. I mean, Goddess alone knows how many clubs and pubs there'll be available when we come out of pandemic. But it would be wonderful if those that are left actually have disabled access. So many of them don't. So actually that recognition of being able to support the diversity of our community is the crucial one. And we still have a ways to go to learn that, I think.
Definitely, I couldn't agree more. And another question, what advice do you have for allies of the community, and how best can they show support?
Well, I think one of the simple things is you'll notice that on my name, I put she, her. So actually showing your pronouns, I think, is a very important thing. Wearing badges, she says cheekily. Usualizing. I mean, the Classroom website is a website that we've produced that, and I've come up with this phrase usualizing because I don't think that normal or normalizing is very useful. So usualizing LGBT experience, dropping it in, mentioning it, talking about LGBT experience is very important, I think. And that whole recognition that making assumptions is dangerous. So, you know, using words which enable people to feel that they are seen and heard. So being careful with pronouns, being careful with how you talk about partners. I mean, I've just been trying to do car insurance this morning, and twice, even though Jean's name is there on the form, they talk about my husband. And you think, oh, for heaven's sake, you know, what are you doing? Looking at your forms, are they set up so anybody coming to those forms can feel welcome? And it's those, often it's the small things, having posters up. And Goddess, we give you enough for free on the LGBT History Month website. You can download and put oodles up. It's sending the message out that it's a safe place. Wearing rainbow lanyards, you know, it's giving the message out that you have thought about the issues and that you welcome them.
Great, thank you, Sue. Well, I think that's everything for questions now. Sue will be available at the end of this webinar to answer more questions, so do keep those in mind if you have any more you need to ask. But in the meantime, I will pass you back to Mandy. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Thank you, Trudy.
Thank you, Sue. That's wonderful. We're now going to take a quick break, a quick comfort break. So we'll join you back here in 10 minutes. Thank you. And welcome back, everybody, to Suffolk Archives, and we are hosting the Outing the Past Festival, International Festival of LGBT History. We are very excited to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Clifford Williams, and he'll be talking about gay youth in England between 67 and 1990. This is going to be a gem.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully you can see my first slide now. Is that right? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Clifford, we can hear you and we can see you.
And you can see my first slide.
And we can see our first slide.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm now going to start my talk, which is, instead of John Adams' short ride in a fast machine, this is going to be a fast ride in a short time over a long period, because I've got a lot to cover, and this is a big topic, and what you're getting today is a potted version of what's normally a lot longer talk. So I'm just going to pick out some highlights of the research that I've been doing. I'm going to start in 2017. Sue's already mentioned the anniversary of the partial decriminalisation of homosexual acts in England and Wales. 2017 marked the 50th anniversary, and the BBC television broadcast a number of programmes as part of their Gay Britannia series, including Growing Up Gay by Ollie Alexander and Against the Law with Daniel Mays as Peter Wildblood. It was during that year that I was doing some research on women police in the Hampshire Record Office, and I found a local LGBT youth group were asking for interviewees from LGBT people who grew up in the 1960s, 70s, 80s and 90s. So I engaged with them, told them my story, and then engaged with them on helping them to discover other stories and archives. And this particularly related to the 70s and 80s, two great eras of great change that I personally witnessed. And of course, the language of the past was different in many respects from that of today. The terms used for LGBT plus people were invariably ones that may seem dated to younger people. This slide contains most of the common terms around in the 1970s and 80s. The terms shown in red were offensive and insulting. Thus, many older LGBT people, like myself, do not like the term queer and find it awkward hearing about queer history. Note also the terms transsexual and transvestite were in use, and the modern term transgender does not appear until the 1990s. It is, of course, difficult not to offend some people when discussing LGBT issues. So diverse is the nature of the different peoples the category covers. Now, Sue mentioned doing a Google search for history and words. Just a word of warning. If you Google search Gay Youth Centre in historical archives, you may come across a report like this. This is a report from Nottinghamshire in 1962 about a gay youth centre. But of course, this wasn't an LGBT or homosexual youth club. This was merely a cheerful, gay, cheery place for young people to meet. 1967 Sexual Offences Act partially decriminalised homosexual acts, but not for anyone under 21. Any sexual act between males where one or both parties were under 21 was a criminal offence. The report shown here is from 1968. It concerns a case of 4 teenage boys who were all convicted for consenting sexual acts. 2 of them were sent to Borstal, basically the older name for what would be called a juvenile detention centre today. Sadly, one of them committed suicide whilst in Borstal. For those of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s, and were gay, lesbian, bisexual, or trans, it was a virtual desert. The only gay people we knew were stereotypical camp men on television, like Kenneth Williams, the characters played by Dick Emery, John Inman, or Larry Grayson with his catchphrase, "Shut that door." But there was a glimmer of hope in David Bowie. He at least said he was bisexual. So in researching this topic, I've spent many hours in archives and libraries. These three in particular, the Bishopsgate Institute, the London School of Economics, where they hold the Hall Carpenter archives, and the British Library in London, which includes a marvellous audio collection. There I am listening to some of the recordings in their listening booths. Now let's go back 50 years, because that marks the first gay youth organised political event that I've been able to find out about. The Gay Liberation Front youth group organised what, in some people's minds, was the first Pride event in London. This was called the Age of Consent March on the 28th of August 1971, with a rally in Trafalgar Square. The late Tony Reynolds was a key organiser for this event. By the end of 1971, the GLF youth group had become the Youth and Education Group. They helped put together editions of the GLF newspaper, Come Together, and in June 1972 they organised a dance in West London, and that summer they organised Gay Pride Week in London. The GLF youth group had four key demands: reduction and eventual abolition of the age of consent, complete unbiased sex education in schools and adult education, young homosexuals not to be subject to psychiatric aversion at school or work, and an end to discrimination of young homosexuals at work and school. For that time, these were very radical demands. The GLF splintered and fractured by 1975. It was a short-lived but lively setup. The Campaign for Homosexual Equality was an organisation older than the GLF and certainly lasted a lot longer. It was more reserved, and for many it was a social group. It had its roots in the North Western Law Reform Committee, began in 1964, renamed Committee for Homosexual Equality in 1969, and from 1971 the Campaign for Homosexual Equality. It is really the most significant gay rights lobbying group before Stonewall. At its second annual conference in Malvern in 1974, it backed a motion calling to campaign to lower the age of consent to 16 plus. It also called to back parents' inquiry. This was a very early setup to support parents of gay children and the gay teenagers themselves, run by Rose Robertson. After the conference, CHE set up the Young Gays campaign, later called the Teenage Movement. And I've been able to track this movement in the Hall Carpenter archives. But when they got to 1976, there were some in CHE who were not happy at the developments. There were tensions. Some CH groups still excluded under 21s. However, it was with an air of optimism that these young people left Waterloo Station, bound for Southampton, for the conference at Southampton in 1976. CHE had actually hired a train, and here we have Phil Cox on the left, more about him shortly, Gary James, waving with his left hand, who's recently published his autobiography, Paul Welsh, John Gill, and Michael, possibly Michael Imber. These young people helped to set up the first London gay CHE teenage group, purely for under 21-year-olds. And they met at the premises of London Friend. London Friends still exists, and in the top right hand corner you can see a snapshot of their latest website. The group moved to the Oval House near the famous cricket ground, but disagreements with CHE and perhaps nervousness on the part of CHE about dealing with under 21s when it was still illegal to have any sexual activity between under 21s, led the teenage group to set up their own independent group, and they used premises in Holloway Road at Grapevine, a sex education organisation. So here we have in Gay News the first announcement of the new London Gay Teenage Group, which is going to meet at 296 Holloway Road. It gives the date of the first meeting there of Sunday the 13th of February 1977, but in fact it did actually meet there a few weeks before to test the water, before they wanted to advertise and invite other young people along. And this young man, Philip Cox, sadly no longer with us, was one of the inspiring people who helped set up that, with Paul Welsh. He had become disillusioned with the CHE, he broke away from them, found new premises, as I mentioned, set up the group, and then went off to pursue other activities as a volunteer at Gay Switchboard. And he was, in fact, at that time, the youngest volunteer. You can see him there on the right. His passion was private radio, and some of his broadcasts for Gay Waves are in the British Library. On the left, you can see listings of gay news for young people. It was such a listing that I found, and therefore went up to Holloway Road and discovered the group. Phil Cox handed over to people like Steve Power, who was chair of the London Gay Teenage Group from 1977 to 1980. Fortunately, Steve kept his paperwork, and he kept lots of it. He went on to train as a youth worker and helped set up other gay youth support networks. In 2018 and 2019, we met up nearly 40 years after we'd last seen each other. And Steve brought some of his papers along. It's with these papers and other documents that people have dug out of lofts and cupboards and drawers that I've been able to piece together a lot of the early youth history of young gay people. And when I use the word gay, I'm talking inclusively here, because gay was a term to cover all aspects of the current LGBT spectrum today. It's in the 80s, 90s that gay and lesbian became a little bit more separate, and then we had this new additional letters to the alphabet, 2000 onwards. So these documents have proved very valuable, and it's also been very exciting to discover them and to rediscover what's happened to people, and people have rediscovered friendships and had a nostalgia trip talking about the past. These are the premises where the London Gay Teenage Group met. A lot of people came out of Holloway Road, men and women, under 21, made their way up the road, about a 10-minute walk to 296. Now, I know for a fact that a lot of people were very nervous about attending the group. They weren't out at home, they weren't out at school, they couldn't be out at school, they often couldn't be out at home. And it was a bit of a secret that they made their way to this door. I do know that some people made their way to this door, but they couldn't go any further and they ran away. People have told me this since I've started my research. And many people have said how many times they walked up and down that road before they actually entered those premises. It was upstairs, there you see the door on the left, above a chicken takeaway, the irony of it. So many of those entered that door, went up those stairs, and pent-up frustration was unleashed. Suddenly, one found a group of like people. A vast array of backgrounds were represented by young people in that group. All ethnicities, classes, religion, but we all had one thing in common, our sexual orientation. We felt together. We've uncovered a photograph that was taken in Holloway Road in 1978, showing two of the early group members. And alongside it, I've put what the road looks like today. And it's much the same in terms of the architecture, but of course the shop fronts have changed. And on the left you see John Stevens, who was the first person who spoke to me when I went to the group that very year. And behind him, wearing a scarf, is a young man called Matthew. A couple of years ago, I heard him speaking on Radio 2 on the Joe Wiley show. He's now Sir Matthew Bourne, and he spoke about what it meant to him to attend the London Gay Teenage Group. The group was well organised, totally unfunded, totally independent, no official recognition at this point, had regular activities like any other youth group, and we met on Sunday afternoons and also on Wednesday evenings. There were trips to other towns and cities, including Ipswich, and I believe it was the Olive Leaf where we went to a disco. In 1977, the group featured in Gay News. As I mentioned, it was not an official group. It was at risk of prosecution. Well, persecution is almost what I said, and it was like a persecution, because there was a rumour that Mary Whitehouse was going to bring actions against the leaders in the group for conspiracy to corrupt public morals. And the group had to take legal advice. Fortunately, somebody, a rich supporter, came in to help us get that legal advice. The group decided to try and pursue an application with ILIA to get official recognition, and they made a film to support that application. They had to appear at area youth committee meetings to state the case for a gay teenage group. No other youth group needed to do this. There was one volunteer gay youth worker, Chris Hume, who helped with a lot of the logistics. But as he's always stressed, the group was run by the young people themselves. Chris himself, being a gay youth worker, helped to establish support for other gay and lesbian youth workers. And here's one of the many letters that I found in the archives where he had organised a meeting of sexual awareness in youth service and gay youth workers group. The gay and lesbian youth workers support groups went under different names at different times. By 1978, we had one out gay pop star, Tom Robinson. He appeared on Top of the Pops, singing 2468 Motorway. And then he released a record, Sing If You're Glad to Be Gay. I tell you, that record was very significant. And so were those record sleeves, because on the back of those record sleeves, those 7-inch vinyls, for those who will remember when we had vinyl, it has made a comeback, I believe, was the gay switchboard number. And a lot of people contacted the London Gay Teenage Group through switchboard. We invited Tom to come along. He brought his guitar and gave us a little private concert. There were only about 20 or 30 people crammed into those rooms on the first floor at 296 Holloway Road. It was very intimate. It was very lovely to be there. The Inner London Education Authority was still making their decision, and there was opposition from many people to the idea of having a homosexual youth group. This is one example, opposition from the National Association of Boys Clubs. But eventually, ILIA agreed, and the gay youth group got its go-ahead. Gay News reported, after 2 years of subdued controversy, it now has set a hopeful precedent for other gay youth groups, and groups are being formed in Liverpool and Manchester. Registration meant the London Gay Teenage Group could apply for grants. It also gave the group some legal protection. It helped pay for the hire of the hall, and the group moved to new premises in Manor Gardens. Around about the same time, some gay men decided there should be more support for gay teenagers, and they set up something called the Joint Council for Gay Teenagers. At the time it was established, there were 3 gay teenage groups: the London one that I talked about, a Leicester group, and a Merseyside group. The Joint Council helped other gay youth groups. It lobbied Parliament. It helped gay youth support each other, and it published things like Breaking the Silence, shown here, and I Know Who I Am. Mickey Burbidge, who was one of the organisers of the Joint Council, is sadly also no longer with us. His papers are in the London School of Economics, and I've had great fun and found it fascinating reading through them, including finding minutes of the meeting that I attended and had forgotten all about. Groups were then beginning to emerge across England. Manchester and Southampton, two prime examples. My short talk concentrates on the London Gay Teenage Group, but regional local histories of early gay youth groups require to be written. So if you're out there and you know more, don't fail to take action. So the Joint Council helped to set up the gay youth movement, the idea being that the adults would hand over to younger people. But when we talk about the gay youth movement, this actually meant anyone up to the age of 26. So youth can sometimes mean up to 26. But with the teenage group, it was basically had to be under 21. The gay youth movement ran a pen pal scheme, which must have helped many isolated teenagers find support and friendship. They ran summer camps. They achieved visitor status at the British Youth Council. They led delegations to Parliament. But politically, they were quite extreme. And because it was so extreme, it was never taken too seriously, and it's left little legacy. Its support for the paedophile information exchange being its most unfortunate connection. It ceased to exist in about 1988. Meanwhile, the teenage group flourished. Here we have some of the members at Gay Pride in 1984. It continued as a youth club. The usual youth club activities took place, the proverbial game of pool. But political controversy continued. Questions about why ratepayers were funding gay teenagers were asked. The Greater London Council funded a research project run by the Gay Teenage Group, and two researchers were employed in March 1983, Hugh Warren and Lorraine Trenchard. Between them, they produced 4 publications in 1984 and 1985, which were widely circulated, quite influential, and can be still found today. When the Queen Mother visited Manor Gardens, the place where the group met, the Queen Mother being the patron of the centre, that's the present Queen's mother, she was presented with 2 of these booklets. Whether she read them, we're not sure. Now, in the early days of the teenage group, both at Holloway Road and Manor Gardens, there were a few young lesbians attended, but they were always very much in the minority. So in 1979, it was decided to establish a separate young lesbian group, although lesbians were still most welcome at the main London Gay Teenage Group. But the young lesbian group flourished, and in 1982, they managed to get funding for a part-time youth worker. Young lesbians particularly played leading roles in the lesbian and gay youth video project called Framed Youth, Revenge of the Teenage Perverts. Produced in 1983, and you can find that online on YouTube. These were some of the young lesbian venues advertised at the Young Lesbian Group. By the end of the decade, a young black lesbian group had been established. This photograph is taken at about 1990. And a youth organisation funded by Islington and Camden councils called the North London Line had a number of projects for young lesbian and gay teenagers and younger people, including a young lesbian video and pizza evening. Moving swiftly on, in 1978, there was increasing concern in the Conservative government about the availability of gay publications in schools and libraries. The Milkman's on His Way was published in 1982, but it was brought to the Prime Minister's attention in 1987. Ilia had included it in a recommended reading list for children aged 15 plus. Graphic sex is described in the booklet, and the highlighted extracts were brought to Margaret Thatcher's attention. This is actually from the National Archives papers on the discussion that took place. This, as we know, led to Clause 28, which subsequently became Section 28 of the Local Government Act 1988, preventing a local authority from promoting homosexuality, and other sections which Sue Saunders has mentioned. So finally, GLC was abolished in 1986. My talk basically ends with 1990 with the abolition of the Inner London Education Authority. But just 4 years later, Edwina Currie, a Conservative, tried to get a bill through Parliament reducing the age of consent to 16. Parliament rejected that, but they did lower the age of consent to 18. Finally, in 2000, they reduced the age of consent to 16, although it didn't become law until the 8th of January 2001. Not only has this research been fascinating, it's also been great fun, particularly having reunions with people who were in the London Gay Teenage Group, encouraging these people to record and share their stories. But whilst doing this research, sadly, I've discovered of people I had known or people I've learnt about who died of AIDS and AIDS-related illnesses. If you want to know more, and there's an awful lot more, my book, Courage to Be, Organised Gay Youth in England, 1967 to 1990, will be published this autumn by the Book Guild Limited. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Clifford. That was, and especially for sharing that wonderful research on gay teenage culture. I mean, it's just so insightful. I mean, you have told us your story coming to Ipswich, and I'd love you to share that at some point. But all I was going to say is really thanks for Steve Power and him hoarding his material for research, and that's really a note for everybody out there. If you have experiences that you want to save for posterity, make sure you keep your records so you can submit them to the archives. That's the only way we'll know what history was like. So thank you. I'm going to hand you over to Sam now for some questions.
Hi, Clifford. Thank you for that. That was so interesting. I've got a few questions coming through. So first of all, how do you feel about gay and specifically drag culture becoming more mainstream? Is there a worry that the public are not aware of the history behind the culture?
That's a really interesting question. A lot of the people who I knew at the Gay Teenage Group and around at the time I was going out with these groups, they loved going to the Black Cap. It was a major meeting place, and they loved the drag. Personally, I never enjoyed drag, and it doesn't appeal to me. But everybody, each to their own. But I think there is quite a bit of confusion now about drag, because is drag transgender? You know, and there's a lot of difference between drag and someone who's actually changing their gender full time and becoming changing their sex included. So. But there is a lot of history of drag. If you look at the research, you look at the historical record, there's a lot of records of cross-dressing, drag, whatever you call it, transvestitism. And so we know a lot more about transvestism, drag, cross-dressing, etc., than we know about many other aspects of the LGBTQ plus spectrum.
Great. And another question coming through. So you mentioned sort of the gay youth groups. What were the main issues that created the breakaway groups within the LGBTQ plus community?
Well, I think what basically happened is the gay scene was quite predatory. For those of you who were around at the time will remember that, particularly for young blokes. I can't speak for young lesbians, but the Gay Teenage Group and other youth groups provided a safer environment where we weren't subject to a lot of predatory adults, if you like. So it also provided an opportunity just to meet people of your own age outside of that club scene, which was also expensive. Clubs and pubs were expensive. Or, you know, if you're a young under 18 or under 16, you weren't meant to be in a club or a pub. I have to say they weren't terribly strict on the ages in those days. So I think they came about because there was a great need for them. There were a lot of young people who were excluded from mainstream youth groups.
Great. And building on from that, do you think that there is still a need for such groups?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, it's not an easy thing, as Trudy mentioned. You know, you come out. That's not an easy step for a lot of people, and you often have to come out several times. And when you're growing up, you're exploring your identity, and you don't know. Every individual has different home circumstances. Some are lucky to have supportive parents or parent. Some don't have supportive parent or parents, and can't come out at home. We've seen it in many of the stories that I've collected for this research I've been doing. People often ran away from home, for example. They ran away to London. Some of you will remember Johnny Go Home documentary, 1975, about young London full of runaways, getting exploited, getting preyed upon. There's a chapter in my book about Johnny Go Home. So yeah, we need safe environments for young people. Now, what's interesting is I've been involved in an LGBT young people's group with their history project, and I've been helping them at some of their meetings before COVID, of course. What I did notice is that there, unlike the group that I belonged to years ago, there are many more trans young people, many more than there were very few in the London Gay Teenage Group, but there were many more in the group I was helping with, and very few young gay men, but hardly any. Is that because it's so much easier to be gay at school? You know, you don't need a special youth group to go to, whereas you might need a group. If you're trans, you might need a group because it's less easy to be trans at school than it is to be gay. I don't know, but there's all sorts of different pressures today on young people. So we had pressures and they've got pressures and they're different pressures. I do love exploring, learning about them, and they learn from me, and this intergenerational exchange of information I think is a key dynamic of LGBT History Month. I think we could all benefit from learning from each other, because I learn a lot from the young people. They tell me a lot about all these new letters in the alphabet soup. I call it the alphabet soup.
That's great. Thank you, Clifford. And yeah, I agree. I think things have definitely changed, but there's definitely a need for that sort of outreach. Another question that's come through is, you mentioned some publications that were made for schools that we can still see now. Where can we find and look at those?
Okay, those 4 publications I put on the screen, they weren't specifically aimed at schools, but they were aimed at the general population of teachers, youth workers, anybody involved in dealing with young people. And I think you can find them if you do sort of Google searches or internet search for book sales, but I can send the information to Mandy. She can include it. Those booklets, they're worth reading because particularly the Something to Tell You one contains lots of personal stories of young people.
Thank you. And one final question before we wrap up. To what extent was difference in legal age of consent the reason for young men being ahead of young women in becoming active in forming LGBT groups?
Well, that's I don't really know the answer to that question, because I think most of us who went to the London Gay Teenage Group had no idea that what we got involved with was illegal. I don't think we knew about the age of consent. We just knew that being gay was considered to be a sin. It was considered to be an illness. You were considered to be an outcast from society. So morally you were outcast. But I don't think many of us actually knew it was against the law. When we went to the group, we found out, oh, it is against the law, but it didn't stop activity, to be frank. So I don't think it was the driving force. It was more the fact that we were driven to the margins of society. We weren't accepted in the mainstream society. It was a taboo topic, taboo in homes, taboo at school. If you had told me in 1980 that, you know, gay men will be able to marry each other, women will be able to marry each other, I would have thought you're talking about, well, I'll be living on Mars in 5 years. You know, it was just not even conceivable that would happen. Things really changed a lot in
and for the better, definitely.
Oh, complete change. And of course, we missed out on a lot of that. But on the other hand, and also we had to live through the era of AIDS. And I tell you, I've been watching that It's a Sin. Russell T Davies, absolutely amazing what he produces. And it really is hard hitting. I find it haunting. I've had nightmares watching it. Some people I know won't watch it because it's just too close to the bone. I knew I'd need boxes of tissues watching that. And I certainly did. I did need them, especially for episode 3 and episode 5. It's very powerful stuff. That I'm welling up talking about it. Yeah.
Well, thank you ever so much for your time, Clifford. I think we could all agree that we could sit and listen to you all evening, but pressed for time. So thank you for that, and I'll pass it back over to Mandy now.
Thank you.
Let me just finish up here. We are coming to the end. Thank you so much for all our speakers. I think everybody has thoroughly enjoyed listening and watching your presentations. We will be sending out a link for a Survey Monkey from Outing the Past, so please will you fill that in and send it back. And we will also collect some of the information from our speakers, ways you can contact them, details of where you possibly may be able to get Dr. Clifford Williams' book when it's available, and also some more details about Veronica's presentation. If you have any questions, please, you can get in contact with us. That's www.suffolkarchives.co.uk. And please remember, Sharing Suffolk's Past, Sharing LGBTQ Stories Past and Present exhibition will be opening at the Hold as soon as COVID restrictions allow us. And you will get to really experience a long sort of timeline of experiences of people in Suffolk. And I hope that will maybe encourage you to take the dive into the archives yourselves. So thanks again for all our wonderful speakers. We hope you had a wonderful evening, and thank you for joining us.